Hello everyone. Millionaire walked in holding his mistress's hand and discarded his pregnant wife. He walked out with nothing. Evan Sinclair thinks Natalie's signature is a formality. That is why he is reckless enough to enter a private aviation hangar holding his mistress's hand his 8-month pregnant wife's separation papers, and tell everyone a $186 million acquisition is already finished. One problem: the buyer does not have Natalie's consent, and Evan has made promises he may not have had the authority to make. Stay through the final hangar door. Subscribe if you enjoy original stories where arrogance collides with consequences, and tell us whether you would have signed. Rebecca Sloan sees the danger first. Don't sign anything tonight. Disclaimer: the people, aviation companies, acquisition documents, board actions, and events in this narrative were created solely for storytelling and entertainment. They do not depict actual individuals, corporations, transactions, or legal cases. Don't sign anything tonight. Rebecca Sloan's voice was barely above a whisper. Natalie Westbrook turned toward her. Across the private aviation hangar, champagne glasses shimmered beneath white architectural lights. Two Gulfstreams stood behind the stage like polished silver monuments. Beyond the open glass doors, runway lights stretched into the New York night. Tonight was supposed to celebrate $186 million. The acquisition of Sinclair Meridian Aviation by Northstar Aero Group. Employees had flown in from 3 states. Investors were already taking photographs. Northstar executives stood beside the stage beneath a screen reading, "A new ERA begins tonight." Natalie rested one hand beneath her 8-month pregnant belly. Her pale golden blonde hair fell in soft waves over an ivory dress. She had spent years imagining what this night might feel like. Relief, pride, maybe even peace. Then the hangar doors opened, and Evan Sinclair walked in holding Madison Price's hand. Not following her, not standing beside her by accident. Holding it, their fingers were interlocked. Visible, deliberate. A conversation near the champagne bar stopped. Then another. Someone lowered a glass. Someone else raised a phone. Natalie felt her son shift beneath her ribs. Slowly, almost as if her body had noticed before her mind allowed itself to. Evan looked immaculate. Dark tailored suit. White shirt. No tie. The controlled confidence of a man who believed every room eventually adjusted itself around him. Madison wore emerald silk. Glossy brunette hair over one shoulder. Her expression was composed. Too composed. She did not look like a woman afraid of being discovered. She looked like a woman who believed discovery was the point. Rebecca stepped closer to Natalie. "You knew?" Natalie kept watching them. No, Evan saw her. For half a second, something passed across his face. Not guilt. Calculation. Then he continued walking, still holding Madison's hand. The distance between the hangar entrance and Natalie could not have been more than 40 yards. It felt longer. Employees noticed. Board members noticed. Northstar's general counsel noticed. By the time Evan stopped in front of his pregnant wife, the room had become painfully quiet. Natalie. She looked at Madison, then at their hands, then back at him. Evan. He released Madison only long enough to reach inside his jacket. A cream envelope appeared. He placed it in Natalie's hand. Her name was printed across the front. Natalie Westbrook Sinclair. "What is this?" Evan lowered his voice. "We should have handled this months ago." Natalie opened the envelope. The first line was enough. Proposed marital separation agreement. For 1 second, the lights above the hangar seemed too bright. Evan continued speaking. "After tonight, we need to stop pretending this marriage still exists." Madison looked away, not ashamed, impatient, as if this conversation were simply delaying the evening she had been promised. Natalie folded the first page back into the envelope. "You brought her here to tell me that." "I brought her because I'm done hiding my life." "Your life?" Evan exhaled. "Please don't do this here." Natalie almost smiled. He had walked into a company celebration holding another woman's hand, handed separation papers to his 8-month pregnant wife, and somehow believed public humiliation would begin only if Natalie responded. Rebecca watched from several feet away. So did independent counsel Thomas Reed. Evan glanced toward the stage. The countdown to the Northstar presentation had begun. 11 minutes. "Natalie," he said quietly, "sign the agreement after the presentation. We can finish everything tonight." Everything. The marriage. The transaction paperwork. All of it. That caught her. Not the marriage. The transaction paperwork. Natalie looked at him differently. What paperwork? Evan's expression tightened for a fraction of a second, then disappeared. Routine closing documents. Behind him, Northstar's logo reflected across the polished fuselage of a Gulfstream. $186 million. A deal Evan had spent almost a year telling everyone was finished. But Natalie knew something he had apparently forgotten. The acquisition had not closed. And among hundreds of pages waiting upstairs was one document Northstar still did not have. Her signature. Evan reached for Madison's hand again. You'll understand after tonight. Natalie looked down at the separation envelope, then at the man who believed he had already decided how both her marriage and her company would end. Rebecca moved beside her. What do you want me to do? Natalie placed one hand over her unborn son. Across the hangar, the presentation clock changed. 10 minutes. She looked at Evan walking toward the stage with Madison. Then she quietly closed the envelope. Nothing yet. Because Evan had arrived believing tonight was the night he discarded his pregnant wife. He still had no idea that before Northstar could buy his future, they were waiting on hers. Natalie isn't really involved anymore. Evan Sinclair had repeated the line until people began to accept it. 5 years earlier, Sinclair Meridian Aviation had 3 managed aircraft, a borrowed office near Teterboro, and barely enough cash to survive another quarter. Evan sold the future. Natalie built the machinery beneath it. She created cash flow models, renegotiated fuel contracts, rebuilt crew scheduling, handled investor reporting, and once spent 14 hours saving a client after repeated dispatch failures. Back then, Evan said, "We built this." As the company grew, we became I. Pregnancy made the rewrite easier. When Natalie's doctor advised less travel, she temporarily reduced daily CFO duties. She did not surrender her board seat or her 29% ownership. Evan nevertheless began telling people she had stepped away from business. Now, inside the hangar, he tried to turn that story into fact. You should go home after the presentation. Natalie looked at Madison, then at him. Why? You've had a long night. He had arrived holding another woman's hand and given his pregnant wife separation papers in front of employees. Yet he warned Natalie not to make things theatrical. She asked what would happen to her role after Northstar closed. You won't need one. Her board seat? Northstar would restructure governance. Her shares? You'll be paid. Evan told her to take the settlement, take the acquisition proceeds, and focus on their son. And Sinclair Meridian? That chapter is over for you too. Natalie felt the insult settle. She had not stopped working because she was pregnant. She had stopped traveling as much. Evan had mistaken a medical precaution for surrender and sacrifice for permission. Before returning to Madison, he told Natalie not to embarrass herself. She waited until he walked away, then opened the closing package in her handbag. A yellow tab marked one page. Holder-specific shareholder consent and transaction release. Natalie Westbrook Sinclair. Her signature line was blank. Evan had spent months telling everyone she no longer mattered. Yet the acquisition documents still recognized what his speeches did not. Her rights remained hers, and he could not sign them away for her. Why does Northstar still need my signature? Natalie had asked Rebecca Sloan 10 days before the celebration. Nearly 400 pages of acquisition documents covered her dining table. Evan had called the $186 million deal finished for weeks, but the closing package still contained transfer provisions and releases tied specifically to Natalie's 29% ownership. Rebecca, an independent director, confirmed what Natalie already suspected. Evan could not sign those provisions for her, and the board could not simply substitute its consent for rights the documents gave Natalie personally. Then Natalie found another schedule. Price Brand Strategies. Transaction Advisory Incentive, $2. $6 million. Price Brand Strategies belonged to Madison Price. Natalie knew Madison as a consultant who appeared at marketing meetings and industry events. She did not yet know Madison would soon arrive holding Evan's hand. Is the money stolen? Natalie asked. No, Rebecca answered. Madison's firm had performed legitimate work. The concern was everything surrounding the transaction-linked package. A closing success fee, post-closing compensation, phantom equity participation, and executive travel benefits. Some elements had been discussed, but Rebecca could not confirm that the full package had received all required approvals. Natalie turned to the conflict disclosures. Was Evan's personal relationship with Madison identified to the board and Northstar where required? Rebecca could not answer with certainty. Natalie refused to fill the gap with jealousy. Then don't accuse him. Find out. Rebecca brought in independent counsel, Thomas Reed, to review the incentive arrangements, authorizations, and disclosure schedules. Natalie gave one instruction: facts only. She did not want affair photographs, private messages, or gossip used as leverage. Before the call ended, Rebecca repeated the warning Natalie would hear again at the hangar. Don't sign anything yet. Natalie looked at her blank consent line and finally understood Evan's urgency. He did not merely want her out of his personal life. He needed her cooperative while a deal affecting her ownership remained unfinished. For the first time, the affair itself was no longer the only betrayal. He had treated the final days of their marriage like another closing condition. We have no basis to call it theft. Thomas Reed said it at the independent review meeting. Natalie nodded. She needed the distinction to remain clear. Price brand strategies had produced real campaigns and legitimate work. The issue was whether Madison's transaction-linked benefits had been authorized and disclosed as required, and whether Evan's personal relationship with her created a conflict that should have been identified during the acquisition process. Thomas showed Natalie the executive representation Evan had signed. It stated, in substance, that material conflicts and side arrangements relevant to the transaction had been disclosed. Thomas did not call the signature proof of fraud. He called it a representation that now had to be tested against the records. Can Northstar cancel the acquisition? Natalie asked. They can make their own decision under the transaction documents. They may ask questions, require corrections, delay closing, renegotiate, or continue. We should not predict it. And my consent. You are entitled to review what you are being asked to sign and decline until you understand and accept it. Rebecca asked whether Natalie wanted the gala canceled. Natalie said no. Employees had worked for months, and she would not punish them to punish her husband. Thomas agreed to correct only information Northstar and the board were entitled to receive. No leaks. No accusations beyond verified facts. Natalie then asked whether the board could simply take Evan's shares if the review went badly. No, Thomas said. Ownership and executive authority were different questions. Any action concerning his role as CEO would have to follow the governing documents and proper board procedures. Natalie looked again at Evan's signed representation. All week he had acted as if the dangerous blank line belonged to her. In reality, the more important question was whether the line he had already signed could survive the facts behind it. The morning of the hangar event, Natalie sat in the nursery with the acquisition folder open across her lap. A model airplane Evan had bought for their son rested on a shelf beside the crib. For months, he had talked about teaching the boy to fly before he was old enough to drive. Natalie still wanted her child to know his father. What she no longer wanted was a home in which love meant one person made the decisions and everyone else called it protection. She phoned Thomas Reed before noon. If the board has to act tonight, I don't want to vote on Evan's employment. Thomas paused. Because you're his wife? Because I'm his wife, a shareholder, and directly affected. I don't want anyone saying this was a marital ambush. Thomas agreed that any board process should address conflicts and follow the governing documents. Natalie then called Rebecca. And no one humiliates Madison for being the other woman. Rebecca sounded surprised. You're protecting her? No, I'm protecting the facts. Her company did real work. If she was promised things Evan had no authority to guarantee, that is a different issue. After the call, Natalie looked at her blank signature line again. The page had seemed frightening 10 days earlier. Now it felt almost ordinary. It was not a weapon. It was consent. Evan's mistake was believing that because he expected it, it already belonged to him. Natalie slid the document back into the folder, placed one hand over her son, and felt him move. We're not disappearing, she whispered. Then she closed the folder and prepared for the celebration Evan believed would end both the acquisition and the marriage on his terms. She doesn't work here anymore. Evan Sinclair said it before the photographer could finish arranging the founder's photograph. The private hangar went strangely quiet. Not completely. Champagne still moved on silver trays. Jet engines whispered beyond the glass. Runway lights still burned blue and white against the New York night. But the people nearest them had heard. Natalie Westbrook stood beneath the wing of a polished Gulfstream, 8 months pregnant, one hand resting beneath her belly. Madison Price remained beside Evan. Her hand was still inside his. The photographer lowered his camera. I was told Mrs. Sinclair was joining the founder's shot. Evan gave him a practice smile. Plans changed. Natalie looked at him. I'm still a director. Evan's smile vanished. On paper, Rebecca Sloan, standing several feet away, turned toward Thomas Reed. Neither spoke. Natalie continued. And I'm still a shareholder. For tonight. That sentence landed differently. Natalie felt it. So did Rebecca. Evan reached toward a leather portfolio held by his assistant. He removed a second folder and handed it to Natalie. The first had contained their proposed separation agreement. This one carried Northstar Aero Group's logo. Shareholder consent and transaction release. Natalie stared at it. 2 documents. 2 signatures. One evening. Evan lowered his voice. Signed both after the presentation. She looked up. You planned this. I planned to finish things. Our marriage and the acquisition. Don't make it sound dramatic. Natalie almost laughed. Behind him stood a Gulfstream worth tens of millions of dollars. Around them were employees, investors, attorneys, and the company Evan had built with her. Beside him stood his mistress, and he was asking his pregnant wife to sign away 2 separate chapters of her life before dessert. What exactly happens to my shares? Natalie asked. You receive the consideration specified in the transaction. I know what the agreement says. Then why are we doing this? Because you just said I'm a shareholder for tonight. Evan's jaw tightened. Northstar is buying the company. Not yet. His eyes changed. Only slightly. Natalie saw it. The closing is administrative at this point. No, she held up the unsigned folder. This is administrative. A pause. And it's unsigned. Madison shifted beside him. Evan told me everything was finalized. Natalie looked at her. Then at Evan. Did he? Evan stepped closer. Natalie, stop. Stop what? Trying to turn paperwork into leverage. Her expression became still. My signature isn't leverage. She placed the folder against her belly. It's consent. Rebecca looked down briefly. Thomas Reed did not. Evan exhaled through his nose. You're angry? No. You found out about Madison and now you want to punish me. Natalie looked at their joined hands. There was pain. Of course there was. But something colder had replaced shock. Clarity. If this were only about Madison, she said, I wouldn't need Thomas Reed in the building. Madison's fingers loosened slightly around Evan's. His gaze moved toward Thomas. What does that mean? Before Natalie could answer, the hangar lights dimmed. A soft chime sounded. The giant presentation screen came alive. Sinclair Meridian Aviation. Northstar Aero Group. $186 million transaction. Applause began. Evan looked toward the stage automatically. His anger disappeared beneath the public expression he had perfected over years of investor meetings. An event coordinator approached. Mr. Sinclair, we're ready for you. Evan straightened his jacket, then turned back to Natalie. Sign the documents while I'm speaking. No, he stared at her. She handed the folder back. Go give your speech, Evan. For a moment, he seemed unsure whether she was challenging him. Then confidence returned. He took Madison's hand. Again. And walked toward the stage. Natalie watched them move through the crowd. Rebecca stepped beside her. Northstar's Counsel is here. I know. They received the supplemental disclosure this afternoon. I know. If Evan accurately describes the status of the transaction, nothing needs to happen publicly. Natalie nodded. And if he doesn't? Thomas Reed answered from behind them. We correct the record. On stage, Evan reached the microphone. A Gulfstream gleamed behind him. Madison stood near the stairs, already smiling as though her new title existed. Evan looked across the room. Employees. Investors. Northstar. Press. Then his eyes found Natalie. She remained beneath the aircraft wing, beautiful, pregnant, silent. The wife he believed he had already removed from both his marriage and his company. Evan smiled into the microphone. Tonight marks the completion of an extraordinary journey. Natalie's eyes moved to Rebecca. Completion. The first word was already wrong. Evan continued. Every material issue has been resolved. Every necessary stakeholder is aligned. And tomorrow Sinclair Meridian begins its future as part of Northstar. Thomas Reed slowly closed the folder in his hands. Natalie said nothing, because Evan had just been given one final opportunity to tell the truth. And within 20 seconds, he had chosen the microphone instead. That statement requires clarification. Thomas Reed did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The words cut through the private hangar harder than the applause that had filled it seconds earlier. Evan Sinclair stood beneath white stage lights, one hand resting on the podium. Behind him, a Gulfstream reflected the Sinclair Meridian and Northstar logos across its polished fuselage. On the screen, $186 million transaction. Evan's smile remained in place. Barely. What statement? He asked. Thomas stepped forward. The statement that every material issue has been resolved and every necessary stakeholder is aligned. The room changed. Northstar executives stopped speaking. Employees lowered champagne glasses. A financial reporter near the aircraft stairs lifted her phone. Natalie Westbrook remained beneath the wing of the Gulfstream. 8 months pregnant. Ivory dress. Pale golden hair over one shoulder. Still, Evan looked at her. Not Thomas. Her. You did this. Natalie's expression did not move. Thomas answered first. Northstar received a supplemental disclosure this afternoon. A Northstar attorney stood. Our closing review has been paused pending clarification. Whispers spread through the hangar. Evan turned toward him. Paused. Yes. There is nothing to clarify. Thomas opened the folder in his hands. There is a transaction-linked compensation arrangement involving Price brand strategies. Madison Price's smile disappeared. A slide appeared on the secondary screen. Price brand strategies. $2,600,000 transaction incentive arrangement. Evan's jaw tightened. That is a legitimate consulting package. Parts of it involve documented consulting services, Thomas said. The precision mattered. No accusation larger than the facts. However, the arrangement also includes a closing success fee, phantom equity participation, executive travel benefits, and proposed post-closing compensation. Madison looked at Evan. You said Northstar approved that. Evan ignored her. Thomas continued. The board is also reviewing whether the CEO's personal relationship with the principal of Price brand strategies was fully disclosed in connection with the transaction. The silence became complete. Madison's face changed. Not shock at the relationship. Shock that the room now understood it. Evan stepped away from the microphone. This is a private matter. Northstar's general counsel answered. Not if it affects transaction disclosures. Evan looked toward Natalie again. You stopped the closing. Natalie finally spoke. No, you refused to sign. Yes. That stopped it. No, she held his gaze. My consent was never given. A beat. That is not the same thing as taking something away. The distinction landed. Evan's expression hardened. The deal was finished. Natalie looked at the giant screen behind him. Then why did you need my signature? No answer. Someone near the back whispered. Madison stepped toward Evan. You told me everything was finalized. It was. Thomas corrected him. It was not. Another Northstar executive spoke. We do not have a completed closing. Evan looked around the room as if searching for someone who would restore the version of reality he had announced. Nobody did. Thomas turned one page. There is another governance issue. Evan's eyes narrowed. The incoming chief brand officer position assigned to Ms. Price has not been approved by the Sinclair Meridian board. Madison stared at Evan. What? He lowered his voice. We were handling it. You said I had the job. You do. Rebecca Sloan stepped forward. No board approval exists. Madison slowly removed her hand from Evan's arm. Not completely. Not yet. But enough for him to notice. Evan looked furious now. This entire presentation is being hijacked. Natalie remained calm. You were given the microphone. His eyes met hers. And you chose what to say. Thomas closed the disclosure folder. Northstar has requested that the transaction remain paused while the governance questions are reviewed. The $186 million number still glowed behind Evan. It suddenly looked less like a victory than evidence of how much was waiting on the truth. Evan walked down from the stage, directly toward Natalie. You knew? I knew the disclosure had been corrected. You let me stand up there. I didn't write your speech. You knew what would happen. No, she looked at him. I knew what could happen if you lied. For the first time, Evan had nothing immediate to say. Rebecca appeared beside Thomas. The independent directors are convening an executive session. Evan turned. Tonight. Yes. For what? Rebecca's expression remained professional. To determine what executive safeguards are appropriate while the review continues. Madison looked from Rebecca to Evan, then back toward the $2.6 million figure still glowing on the screen. The room that Evan had entered believing was a celebration had become something else. A record of what had been promised. of what had never been approved, of what had not been disclosed, and of what one man had chosen to say when the microphone was finally his. Natalie rested one hand over her unborn son. Evan had spent months treating her signature like a formality. Now, standing beneath the aircraft they had built a company around, he finally understood. The signature was not paperwork. It was permission, and Natalie had never given it. What exactly do you still control? Madison Price asked the question through the glass conference room door. Evan Sinclair did not answer. 30 minutes earlier, the private hangar had been filled with champagne, applause, and a glowing announcement of a $186 million acquisition. Now the music was off. Northstar executives had moved into a separate room with Counsel. Employees were being quietly told the closing celebration had become an ordinary company reception. And inside the conference room, Sinclair Meridian Aviation's independent directors were deciding what to do with its CEO. Natalie Westbrook sat near the end of the table, 8 months pregnant, pale golden hair over one shoulder, one hand resting over her unborn son. She did not vote on anything involving her marriage. She did not demand Evan's removal. She barely spoke. Rebecca Sloan chaired the session. Thomas Reed presented the facts. The board reviewed the $2.6 million price brand strategies arrangement, the incomplete disclosure of Evan's relationship with Madison, the unapproved chief brand officer title, the transaction representations. Evan was given time to respond. He used most of it explaining why none of those things should matter. The services were real. Thomas nodded. No one has said otherwise. The incentive was commercially reasonable. That remains under review. Madison is qualified. That is not the governance issue. Evan leaned back. So this is about who I'm sleeping with. Rebecca's expression hardened. No, a beat. It is about whether a personal relationship affecting company decisions was properly disclosed. The difference seemed to irritate him more than an accusation would have, because there was nothing emotional to fight. Only procedure. Only documents. Only dates. After nearly an hour, the independent directors voted. Pending investigation, Evan Sinclair was placed on administrative suspension as chief executive. His ownership did not disappear. His 41% remained his. He was not arrested. He was not declared guilty of anything. But operational authority moved temporarily to an interim executive committee. Certain system permissions were disabled. Transaction communications would be handled through independent counsel. Northstar would keep the acquisition closing paused until the governance review was complete. Evan stared at the written resolution. You're suspending the founder of this company. Rebecca answered calmly. We're suspending the CEO pending review. The distinction followed him into the corridor. Madison was waiting. Her green eyes were fixed on her phone. You said tonight made everything official. Evan loosened his collar. It still can. My chief brand officer role? We'll fix it. You told me the board already approved it. They were going to. That isn't what you told me. Evan glanced toward Natalie through the glass. This is her. Madison looked in the same direction. Natalie was speaking quietly with Thomas. No smile. No victory. No celebration. Just documents. Madison turned back. You said Natalie had no power anymore. She doesn't control the board. Apparently neither do you. His face changed. Be careful. Madison laughed once. There was no humor in it. You told me the $2.6 million package was guaranteed. It will be if Northstar closes. If. Evan said nothing. My title. Silence. My post-closing contract. Nothing. Madison stepped closer. You told me you owned 41% and everyone else followed you. I am still the largest shareholder. That wasn't my question. The line sounded almost like Natalie. Evan noticed too. Madison looked toward the darkened stage. The huge $186 million graphic had been replaced by the Sinclair Meridian logo. No Northstar celebration. No incoming title. No future promised beneath spotlights. She looked back at Evan. What exactly do you still control? His mouth opened. Nothing came out. For the first time that night, Madison seemed to see him without the company around him. Not the private aircraft. Not the CEO title. Not the closing announcement. Just a man who had promised tomorrow before anyone had approved it. Evan reached for her hand. Madison. She looked down at his fingers. The same hand she had held when they entered the hangar. Then she slowly pulled hers away. No shouting. No scene. She simply stepped back. You made me walk in there thinking everything belonged to you. Evan lowered his voice. Don't leave because of one bad night. One bad night. She glanced through the glass at Natalie. Your pregnant wife knew more about your company than you told me. Evan's jaw tightened. Madison continued. And apparently she knew more about you too. Then she turned. Her heels clicked against the polished floor. Madison. She kept walking. Evan did not follow. Behind the glass, Natalie saw Madison leave. Their eyes met for less than a second. Natalie did not smile. She only placed one hand over her son and looked away. Because this was never the revenge Evan wanted to blame on her. Natalie had not taken Madison from him. She had not taken Northstar. She had not taken his authority. She had simply stopped signing, correcting, protecting, and carrying the consequences before they reached him. And once she stopped, Evan finally discovered how much of his power had depended on someone else quietly holding it together. Are you really going to risk the acquisition over one signature? Evan Sinclair asked after midnight. The private aviation hangar was almost empty. No applause. No music. Only the soft mechanical hum of aircraft systems and the distant movement of ground crews beyond the glass. Champagne glasses were being collected. The giant Northstar acquisition display had been turned off. One Gulfstream remained illuminated beneath white architectural lights. Its tail still carried the Sinclair Meridian logo. Evan sat beneath it alone. His jacket was open. His tie was gone. His phone lay on the table beside him, useless for accessing the executive systems that had been suspended less than an hour earlier. He still owned 41% of Sinclair Meridian Aviation. He was still wealthy. He was still entitled to respond to the investigation. But the closing was paused. His CEO authority was suspended. Madison was gone. And the future he had announced from the stage no longer existed simply because he said it did. Natalie Westbrook approached slowly. 8 months pregnant. Ivory dress. Pale golden hair falling over her shoulders. One hand resting protectively over her unborn son. Natalie placed the cream envelope from earlier on the table. Proposed marital separation agreement. I'm not risking anything, Natalie said. I'm refusing to pretend consent exists when it doesn't. She tapped the cream envelope. And I want a proper divorce. His eyes moved to the envelope. You're not signing this. My attorney will respond. And the company? What about it? You stopped the acquisition. No, his jaw tightened. You withheld your consent. I declined to sign documents I had not approved. That's the same thing. It isn't. Natalie pulled out the chair across from him, but remained standing. My 29% belongs to me until I choose to transfer it under terms I understand and accept. Evan looked toward the darkened Northstar screen. You knew what this deal meant to me. I knew what it meant to the company. That company exists because of me. Natalie's expression softened. Not with agreement. With exhaustion. It exists because a lot of people carried it. A beat. Some of them quietly. Evan looked away. For 5 years, Natalie had solved problems before they reached him. Cash shortages. Investor concerns. Operational failures. Bad contracts. Hard conversations. He had called that partnership when he needed it. Then dependence when he no longer respected it. Are you going after my shares? He asked. No, my money. Marital assets will be handled legally. My board seat. That's not mine to decide. Evan finally looked at her. You could destroy me. Natalie shook her head. No, don't pretend you couldn't. I could make noise. She glanced toward the empty stage. But you made enough tonight. Silence settled between them. Then Evan's eyes dropped to her belly. What about our son? Natalie's hand moved instinctively. He deserves a father. Evan looked up. So you're not keeping him from me? No, the answer seemed to surprise him. Natalie continued. But he also deserves to grow up knowing that love does not require one person to disappear so the other can feel powerful. Evan swallowed. For the first time that night, he looked smaller than the company around him. Was any of it real? Natalie stared at him. The marriage. He nodded. All of it. His face changed. Then how did we get here? You stopped seeing partnership. Her voice remained quiet. And started seeing permission. A ground security manager approached. Mr. Sinclair. Evan turned. The man held out his hand politely. Your temporary executive access credential, please. For several seconds, Evan did not move. Then he reached into his pocket. A black Sinclair Meridian badge appeared between his fingers. He looked at it. Founder. Chief Executive Officer. The title was still printed beneath his photograph. But the system behind it no longer recognized the authority. Evan placed the badge in the security manager's palm. Thank you, sir. The man walked away. Natalie watched without satisfaction. That mattered. She had not wanted this moment. She had simply stopped preventing moments like it. Evan stood. So that's it. Natalie picked up her and signed shareholder consent folder. For tonight. He looked at the separation envelope. Then at her. Natalie turned toward the hangar exit. Runway lights stretched into the darkness beyond the glass. Natalie. She stopped. I really thought you'd sign. She looked back once. I know. That was the saddest part. Not that Evan had asked. That he had never imagined she might say no. Natalie continued walking. One hand holding the folder. The other resting over her son. Behind her, Evan remained beneath the aircraft carrying his name. Hours earlier, he had entered the hangar holding his mistress's hand, certain his pregnant wife was the person being discarded. Now Madison was gone. The $186 million closing was paused. His executive authority was suspended. His access badge had been collected, and Natalie was leaving without taking a single thing that belonged to him. Evan walked through the same hangar doors alone. Not penniless, not ruined overnight, just finally separated from every illusion he had mistaken for ownership. Natalie never turned around. Some men do not lose everything because a woman takes it from them. They lose it when she finally stops carrying what was never hers to hold. Evan still had money, 41% of Sinclair Meridian, and every right to answer the board's review. But none of those things could manufacture the one signature he had treated as inevitable. Near the hangar exit, a ground crew rolled equipment past him without looking up. The Northstar screen was dark. Madison was gone. His executive badge was no longer in his pocket. Across the glass, Natalie moved toward the parking area with the unsigned folder held against her side. Evan had entered the hangar believing the acquisition, the new woman, and his wife's cooperation were all closing conditions he controlled. He walked out understanding the difference between ownership and consent. Money could buy aircraft, advisors, offices, and time. It could not sign Natalie's name. That was what he left without.